What we were doing before, we were working on the story, The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin, right? And so we can resume that. Let's see. Here we go. We can resume and then continue our story, The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. So let's start from the beginning. We can read what we read already and then go on to our new parts. So get my marker ready to write. Okay. The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. This is a tale about a tale that belonged to a little red squirrel, and his name was Nutkin. He had a brother called Twinkleberry and a great many cousins. They lived in a wood at the edge of a lake. In the middle of the lake, there's an island covered with trees and nut bushes. And amongst those trees stands a hollow oak tree, which is the house of an owl who is called Old Brown. One autumn when the nuts were ripe, and the leaves on the hazel bushes were golden and green, Nutkin and Twinkleberry and all the other little squirrels came out of the wood and down to the edge of the lake. They made little rafts out of twigs, and they paddled away over the water to Owl Island to gather nuts. Each squirrel had a little sack and a large oar, and spread out his tail for a sail. They also took with them an offering of 3 fat mice as a present for Old Brown, and put them down upon his doorstep. Then Twinkleberry and the other little squirrels each made a low bow and said politely, "Old Mr. Brown, will you favor us with permission to gather nuts upon your island?" But Nutkin was excessively impertinent in his manners. He bobbed up and down like a little red cherry, singing, riddle me, rut-tot-tote, a little wee man in a red, red coat, a staff in his hand and a stone in his throat. If you'll tell me this riddle, I'll give you a groat. Now this riddle is as old as the hills. Mr. Brown paid no attention whatever to Nutkin. He shut his eyes obstinately and went to sleep. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts and sailed away home in the evening. So, that's where we are so far in the story. All of the squirrels are going to this island to get some snacks. And what they do is they give an offering to Mr. Brown, or Old Brown, because he's a big scary owl. If they don't give him snacks, maybe he will eat the squirrels, right? So we can continue our story here where they are visiting Owl Island again. Okay? Give me 1 second. Remember, it's morning here, so I need my coffee. So let's keep on going. But next morning, they all came back again to Owl Island. And Twinkleberry and the others brought a fine, fat mole and laid it on the stone in front of Old Brown's doorway and said, "Mr. Brown, will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather some more nuts?" So, let's go piece by piece. It starts with, but next morning, they all came back again to Owl Island. In modern English or American English, you would say, but the next morning. So, saying, but next morning, blah, 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 is maybe British or maybe just old-fashioned. In modern English, remember this story is like 100 years old. But now we would always say the next morning. The next morning, they all came back again to Owl Island. And Twinkleberry and the others brought a fine, fat mole. Okay, here's a type of animal. They bring an animal for the owl to eat. A mole is a little bit like a mouse, but a little different. They usually have a long nose, and they dig in the ground. Maybe I don't know if you've ever seen a mole before, but, let's see. Can you see my screen, or is it just me talking? Okay. So, sorry, Facebook wasn't updating, so it looked like I had the wrong thing. Well, this is a very funny looking mole. Copy image. And there. That's a mole. So a mole is a little bit like a mouse, but they dig holes in the ground. They're kind of weird looking, but kind of cute too. So they brought a mole for Old Brown, the owl. And they laid it on the stone in front of Old Brown's doorway and said, "Mr. Brown, will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather some more nuts?" So this is similar to what we read last time. Will you favor us with your permission? Which is like too polite. You could just say, could we, blah, 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 or can we, blah, blah, blah. Is it okay if we, blah, blah, blah? I'll add that. So you might say, in real life, let's say you're at the office and your boss is working, and you say, could we go out to lunch now? Like, will you let us leave? Or can we tell the client blah, 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 blah? Like, can we tell the client that we don't want their product? Or something like that? Or the opposite. Or can we tell the blah, blah, blah? Or whatever. Is it okay if I tell him this or that? So usually we'd say, could we, can we, or is it okay if? Will you favor us with permission is a little too crazy. And then here's an interesting word, gracious. Gracious is a very old-fashioned word. We don't use it very often. Gracious is like very wonderful and kind and thoughtful. Like, oh, you are so gracious. It's like you're so nice, you're so kind. But it's not a very common word. You might see it in stories about Europe 500 years ago. You'd use the word to talk about a king or a queen. Oh, very gracious. Okay, let's keep on moving. So, many of the squirrels are very polite, and here we go. But Nutkin, who had no respect, began to dance up and down, tickling old Mr. Brown with a nettle, and singing, "Old Mr. B, riddle me ree. Hitty-pitty within the wall, hitty-pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty-pitty, hitty-pitty will bite you." Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. So most of the squirrels are being very polite and being too polite, saying, "Oh, please let us find food on your land." But Nutkin, who had no respect. So this is like that fancy word we learned before, which was impertinent. Yeah, I was going to look it up, but he is impertinent, which means he has no respect. Having no respect means like, oh, you are not polite, you don't care, you don't show that you're a nice person. So Nutkin is not being very nice. He began to dance up and down. So boom, 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 going up and down, tickling old Mr. Brown with a nettle. So you can see what he has with a nettle. A nettle is a kind of plant that he's holding, and it's like a little stick with some sharp parts on it. So he's poking Mr. Brown. This doesn't sound very good. And it says he's tickling old Mr. Brown with a nettle. So nettle is not a very common word because it's like a kind of stick, so who cares? But tickling is a common word, or kind of common. It's when someone touches you and it like gently to make you laugh. It sounds like usually it's when someone touches you down here under your arm. That's tickling. And you go, oh, it makes you laugh or makes you scream. So Nutkin is tickling him with a nettle, just trying to bother him. Maybe Nutkin thinks it's funny, but I don't think Mr. Brown thinks so. So this is a rhyme, but it doesn't really mean much. So, old Mr. B, riddle me ree. We said before what a riddle is. Riddle is like a kind of like a poem or a song that has a trick to it. So riddle me ree. Hitty pitty within the wall, hitty pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty pitty will bite you. So what could this be? Hitty pitty is not a real word, but it's the name of something. Try to imagine what hitty pitty is. Hitty pitty within the wall. Within just means inside of. So this thing can be inside of the wall. So hitty pitty within the wall. So hitty pitty in the wall. Hitty pitty without the wall. Here the word without means outside of. Oops, outside of. Okay, so start thinking. Hitty pitty within the wall. It's something that can be inside of a wall. That's weird. Hitty pitty without the wall. It can be outside of the wall. Okay, that's normal. So it's something that can go in a wall and out of a wall. What could it be? If you touch hitty pitty will bite you. So this thing can go inside of a wall and out of a wall, and then it can bite you. What could that be? Well, what do you think? I think it's probably a mouse. So we read the Tailor of Gloucester a long time ago, and mice can live in the wall or out of the wall, and so maybe hitty pitty is a mouse because it can live in the wall, out of the wall, and it can bite you. Okay, and so Nutkin is bothering Mr. Brown and singing rhymes at him, or riddles. And then Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. So Mr. Brown doesn't care. It's just like, oh, go away, and goes inside to eat his snack. Poor Mr. Mole. Oh, this little guy. Okay. Keep going. He shut the door in Nutkin's face. Presently, a little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree. And Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang, "A house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full." So Mr. Brown shut the door in Nutkin's face. So, shut the door in someone's face. This is a pretty common phrase. It's not a nice thing, but it's a common phrase. To shut the door in someone's face. What does that mean? So shut the door is easy. Just close the door, right? Shut means the same as close. Close the door. Shut the door sounds a little bit faster. So, boom. And to shut the door in someone's face is like someone is standing at the door and you close the door. Boom. It doesn't hit their face, but maybe they're standing in front of the door and then you close it. Boom. And so that's what it means to shut the door in someone's face. You just like want them to go away. And so, boom. And they're like standing there trying to talk to you, but you close the door. So he shut the door in Nutkin's face. Presently, we saw this before. This is an old-fashioned way to say at that time or right then. Or, yeah, it's a way to say like at that moment or right away. So presently, a little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree. So thread is usually used for fabric or clothes. It's like a string, a very thin string. And so it's a very thin little line of blue. A little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree. Now, is it really a thread? Is it a piece of string from clothing? No, but this is a metaphor. Metaphor is when you use other words or other things to just like compare or describe something. So it's not really a thread, but it looks like it. So it's like a little line. So we can say a thread of blue smoke. So a little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree, and Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang. Now, what is a keyhole? Well, probably pretty easy, but maybe you haven't heard this before. So it's just what it sounds like. Usually we'd write it as one word, keyhole. But it's on a door, it's the hole where you put a keyhole. And the name in English is that simple. So you put your key in the keyhole and turn it to open the door. So Nutkin peeped through the keyhole. Oh, we should review that word. Peep is another way to say look. You could just say he looked through the peephole. He looked through the keyhole. But he peeped through the keyhole. What is the difference between peep and look? Peep is like you look in a sneaky way. Maybe you shouldn't be looking. And so Nutkin is outside and he's peeping through the keyhole. So he's being a little bit sneaky. Like he doesn't want, maybe Old Brown doesn't want him to look, but he's looking in a sneaky way or a secret way. So in this story, he's peeping, but sometimes peeping is not good. Someone's looking when they shouldn't be or something. So Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang, "A house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full." So hole and bowl rhyme. And so he's just talking about gathering nuts, I think. A house full, a hole full. So the owl is in a house and it's full of stuff. The house is kind of like a hole, so it's full of stuff. A hole full of stuff. You cannot gather a bowl full. So you're collecting stuff in a bowl and it's too hard to get all that stuff. It doesn't really matter. It's not important what it means because it doesn't really mean anything. Nutkin is just being annoying. Okay, so let's keep going. One more part. The squirrels searched for nuts all over the island and filled their little sacks. But Nutkin gathered oak apples, yellow and scarlet, and sat upon a beech stump playing marbles and watching the door of old Mr. Brown. So, is Nutkin doing what he's supposed to do? Is he gathering the nuts he should? No. So the squirrels searched for nuts all over the island and filled their little sacks. That's what they should be doing. They're out here gathering food. But Nutkin gathered oak apples. So I've never seen an oak apple in real life. Let's see what a picture looks like. So oak is a kind of tree. So an oak tree and an oak apple is a little fruit from an oak tree. So it's kind of almost looks like a grape, but people don't eat these. I've never heard of people eating these. And so that's what Nutkin is gathering. I'll show you what an oak tree is. Let's see. I want a picture without words. Well, whatever. You know it's a kind of tree. It's a type of tree that's common in the US. It's an oak tree. And so Nutkin gathers oak apples, which are these fruits from the tree. Maybe squirrels can eat them, but people don't. And they're yellow and scarlet. Yellow, easy peasy, but scarlet is a word for a kind of red. Not exactly the regular red you expect, but usually like a dark red or deep red. Okay. And so Nutkin gathered oak apples, yellow and scarlet, and sat upon a beech stump playing marbles. So beech is a kind of tree. It's usually white on the outside, but he's on a beech stump. Stump is what you see in this picture here. It's where a tree has been cut. So if I have this tree and I cut it down, the top goes away, but then what's left is this bottom part. The bottom of a tree after it's been cut is called a stump. So Nutkin is sitting on a beech stump playing marbles. See these little balls? So marbles is a game where you play with little glass balls and you flick them with your thumb. So Nutkin is playing marbles and watching the door of old Mr. Brown. Okay, so Nutkin is just bothering Mr. Brown and staying outside of his door, just playing and not doing his work. So it's a little bit dangerous for Nutkin. He might be in trouble if Mr. Brown gets hungry, right? Let's see. Let's let's stop here for today, just because it's getting late. It's 9:30 or so. And we can continue the story next time, okay? So what we can do, we can go back and read what we read today. We had 4 parts. And practice one more time, and then we can call it a day. So, review what we read today. But next morning, they all came back again to Owl Island. And Twinkleberry and the others brought a fine, fat mole and laid it on the stone in front of Old Brown's doorway and said, "Mr. Brown, will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather some more nuts?" But Nutkin, who had no respect, began to dance up and down, tickling old Mr. Brown with a nettle and singing, "Old Mr. B, riddle me ree. Hitty-pitty within the wall, hitty-pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty-pitty, hitty-pitty will bite you." Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. He shut the door in Nutkin's face. Presently, a little thread of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree, and Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang, "A house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full." The squirrels searched for nuts all over the island and filled their little sacks. But Nutkin gathered oak apples, yellow and scarlet, and sat upon a beech stump playing marbles and watching the door of old Mr. Brown. So let's stop there. That's where Nutkin is, again, being disrespectful. He's not being nice to the big, scary owl. And he's just playing instead of working and gathering nuts. Next time, we can see what happens on the 3rd day that the squirrels go gathering nuts. Hopefully, Mr. Brown stays asleep and doesn't get angry at Nutkin. Or maybe Nutkin will learn to be more respectful, right? So, let's stop there. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you had a good time. Happy Sunday. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.